Okay, thank you very much, Christine. My name is Frank Zeichner. I'm the CEO of the Internet of Things Alliance Australia. We are a not-for-profit industry association, the peak body for IoT in Australia. Our remit is to accelerate the adoption of IoT for economic advantage and societal benefit. We're a collaboration of industry, government, research and community. And the journey to get here was we saw an evident lack of collaboration in Australia, where our independence and our traits of I can do it myself sometimes run across the wrong direction for how we might need to be in the new world, where data itself forces itself across boundaries. It forces collaboration, and we saw no coordinated collaboration either at industry, government, or research or community level. And so we thought, oh, we'll just step into the breach.
Oh, that's you know, when you see a gap and you see how you can get there. But what's your own kind of personal training or background? What did you do before coming into this role?
Okay, so engineering background of physics and engineering, 20 years at a company that no longer exists called Alcatel, but very big in telecommunications, really huge on the startup of broadband and mobile, everything else. So that was interesting. And then I moved more into running a few small companies around operations and maintenance, inventory management, all those things at the back end, which aren't evident when everyone just talks about, oh, we're just connecting the pipes. But when you have a few million pipes or a few tens of millions of users, things start becoming very interesting in a different way. So I got a lot of experience on that side, and then I did private consulting, and then this sort of just turned up, and I'm at a time of life where I felt like I should do something that would add to the value of everyone working together, and we're in such a time of change that we need collaboration more than ever. And I hear many times, it's not about the technology, which is entirely true, but what the technology creates and enables and also reveals needs to be addressed by people who understand the technology, but who also care about what it means for our planet and our people. Nice.
Yeah, and I think it's that systems level approach. If you can see that, you can see the potential of IoT. So I'm interested to hear what your answer to the next question is, which is really just asking you to describe what IoT is in your own words. And again, you're coming at this from quite an interesting perspective. So
for me, IoT, I sort of explained it in two different ways. I start with the UN ISO description, which is basically collecting data, transforming it across into a virtual world, and then bringing it back into the physical world. Eventually, it comes back. So it's an end-to-end journey, and I regard that as encompassing all elements in that journey, whether they're sensors or networks or cloud or AI or actuators and robots. They are all part of that end-to-end. And the way I try and explain it to people is I say, when we talk about the internet, we don't talk about routers or IP. We talk about something that has a way bigger context in our heads that's sort of built up. We don't yet have the same view of that with the Internet of Things, but if we could imagine that it's the internet also connected to everything, and that's it's sort of frightening, but it's sort of mind-blowing and opening. But it isn't, it isn't just the sensors.
No, it's so true. It's so true, and it is a wee bit mind-blowing when you think about all of the possibilities. And I think you're right. I don't think we have quite the language yet to really describe it in a way that people can then see what we're all trying to say. So part of this exercise is to try and flush out that language.
And I find it, it's a bit of a millstone in a way, having the term Internet of Things, although it has that connotation of the internet, or it's more than internet, it's Internet of Things, we haven't translated it that way yet. And I use euphemisms, and everyone uses different terms for something that looks a bit similar. And I'm currently playing with intelligent data infrastructure because it has intelligence sort of means it's got AI, it's got ML, it's got interpretation. It's about the data, not about the technology. And then infrastructure, it also requires technology. So it somehow encompasses all three, but they're all quite specific terms that can be reinterpreted as well. But at least I sort of find you have to use a number of different lenses, and some resonate with some people and some don't. And we haven't got, and of course there's the old ubiquitous digital transformation thing, which is another lens which sometimes clouds it and sometimes enlightens, depending on where you're coming from.
So true. So true. Okay. And then, so I think, I think it is a lot more about the data, and it's kind of IoT's the feature, but what's the benefit?
Absolutely.
If we then talk about then kind of where you're going, so you help the ecosystem. So I'm interested to see kind of how you describe it. So I'd like you to just describe in your own words how you see the IoT ecosystem, and obviously for you, this is very much with an Australian point of view. But what I like about how you described yourselves was it was IoT's not just about the technology part. You're trying to connect the governments and the cities and the academia. So for you, you have a different perspective of what your ecosystem is. Could you just describe kind of the ecosystem that you work with and kind of how you see the IoT working across all of those different players?
Yep, I mean, and there are two different things here. There's the ecosystem that I'm working with. There's the ecosystem that I think it impinges on that should be working with it, but disenfranchised for one reason or another. And so the ecosystem that I'm working with is more industry, government, and research, and a little bit of and to the extent that it sort of affects competition policy a little bit, and security, not to mention data consent. It starts affecting consumers, of course. I mean, but they're not much in the conversation, nowhere near. So the users and the citizens aren't. It does include them in that entrepreneurial, experimental school, put a sensor out, see what it looks like part. So it's part of the education, but in terms of the setting policy, not well connected at all in Australia. There's a fear, in fact, of technology, I think. I think it's everywhere. Whereas I sort of perceive, but maybe I'm wrong, but I perceive that, for example, in vast parts of Asia, there's an excitement about the technology, excitement of the possibilities. Here, there's either skepticism, excitement, or dread, that worries me a lot. And I'm a firm believer that the success in Australia, because we are a well-educated society, and we rate very highly on World Economic Forum indicators and everything else, really depends on bringing everybody along. I think that if people start fearing it too much, it'll slow down. If people start being insecure, it'll slow down. And that isn't. You don't solve that by saying, "Don't be afraid, it's all okay." You solve it by getting them engaged in the conversation and understanding what's happening, and then being transparent about how we're managing things and being in the debate and influencing what the outcomes are. Now, I'm a bit of an idealist in that regard, but I do know that if we don't go a reasonable way down that journey, the brakes will be put on by those who say, "Hey, wait a second, we don't trust it enough." What I'm trying to do is get the government particularly on board early, because I fear that unless governments basically do what they should be doing, is actually guiding how the citizens live and work and play together, it will be done underneath by those who manage data independently, who aren't actually voted for by the people, digital platforms and all those sort of, where they just provide the services and bypass government. then the government's left with what's left. So for me, the Internet of Things and grasping those things is actually an existential threat to government and needs to be considered. How's that for a big picture?
Oh, I love it. I love it. And it's true. I think when people are thinking about it at this kind of how do we transform our economy level, the security aspects are front and center. And I've heard that from not just you, but from a couple of other people who are thinking of this at national scales and working across academia, politics, industry to try and find then the right solution. So I think people are working on kind of enabling IoT at all of these different layers. It's a really important one. It's a really nice point. Thank you, because I haven't heard that articulated quite like that. So that's
cool. You've triggered on one of the things I care about a lot, which is security. And I think this is an interesting one because how do you connect with people about security in a way that they understand? And it isn't by telling them to be secure. It's a bit like telling people to not waste water. Those leaflets aren't read. So it's how do you make it really easy for them to tell whether they're wasting water, or how do you make it really easy to tell if this is secure? And so one of the things that the IoT Alliance is pretty big on is a security tick mark. So when you buy it, you know it's secure. I mean, I can tell you the person selling you that product in the shop has no idea, and you can't see it on the label. It's just assumed to be there. In the IoT world where everything is connected, that is not acceptable, in my mind. Yeah. And it can be fixed, but yeah, sorry about that.
And it's one of these underlying things that you assume is there. If a marketplace is mature, then these things come in. But when it's being done for the first time, you don't necessarily have all of those foundations in place.
The behaviors and the signals are not there. And anecdotally, I've heard from many, all the software suppliers and Cisco's of the world, they're saying do your upgrades, do everything else. And the anecdotal evidence is that regularly less than 25% actually do it. So these are the people who are actually knowledgeable. Forget about the people who don't know what they're doing, and that's the general public. We don't know where we're going. Yeah,
and then who do we trust to take us down shine the light down that road?
Well, it's not undoable. I mean, it's a bit like, I liken it to the start of automobiles. There were no speed signs, there were no seat belts, there were none of that. And eventually the problem got so bad that they started, putting lines down the middle of the road and things like that, right? It would be really good if we actually started doing that a little earlier, because the ramifications of this are pretty big. And it actually could be lives as well.
Okay, on that. Well, this is a heavy interview. Oh.
I must be reading the wrong book.
No, but super important stuff. Super important stuff. Okay, I'm going to change tacks here a little bit, and then ask about advice. Okay, so you must also have, kind of from where you're sitting, kind of people, maybe not just the small people trying to do stuff, but also the bigger organizations, or kind of trying to rewrite some of the ways things are done. So the question I ask is, what advice do you have for people starting an IoT project? But for you, maybe you could give that some context before you answer the question, just so that we can understand what you're seeing at. So this is, again, people that maybe haven't used IoT, they don't know what it is, they're starting a project, they want to go through a change. What advice do you have?
Well, I think the usual advice you'd expect for almost everything else: talk to people who have done it. Get advice about who you should talk to, who are trusted. We're just doing a survey right now on IoT skills, and whether it's needed or not. And one of the things that's coming up really high up there is there are so many people telling you what to do with advice and solutions, you can't sort the wheat from the chaff. So find trusted people, and look for testimonials. Try not to do it all from first principles. It's good, solid, common sense advice, and it applies to this and pretty much everything else that you're doing. We're trying to provide some place where they can go and ask those questions and get pointed to the right people, and provide case studies and project lists that people can call up. That's probably the best. I think we produce good practice guides for some aspects like security and stuff. Again, eventually it very quickly becomes, where do I look? Which is the trusted one? That's like, for example, one of the sectors we target in Australia, because we have such a big reputation and such a great market for food. But farmers don't talk to technologists. They talk to their agronomists, right? And so all of this is, who do you talk to that can help sort the wheat from the chaff? So our target is it's the farmers, but it's actually the agronomists. And so that channel to people that you trust, the network, that's how we work. There's the big picture, which is, oh, wait for standards to turn up and then we can just plug everything in. Well, stuff's happening well before the standards. That's the way the world works. And if you're transforming, if you're waiting for the standards, you're probably too late. That's shutting the gate after the horse is well and truly bolted. So for me, that's probably the best advice. All the rest is, it's different if you haven't just started, because we find that different companies are in different stages of maturity, and so it's not just a question of you need to perceive where you are in your business context before you can meaningfully think about enhancing with what the data is that you need, and none of those things start with a technical question. They all start with, what's driving my business? What is it? Am I not addressing the market I need, or have I got a problem with supply chain, or is the quality of my product not good? What is, those are the questions, and every time really, and it just turns out that there's a whole lot of data that we could use to make decisions that we don't have. And by asking the right questions, you can then ask the question, what data do I need? And I think the biggest gap is in real-time data. I mean, everyone uses old stuff. They use, this is what we did before, wonder why it isn't working now. Well, we don't actually know what's happening now. And so the big transformation is there something that's real-time? I mean, this is once you worked out what you want to do. Real-time data that I need, which for me differentiates the thing that was very, very popular about 10 or 15 years ago, which is big data. Oh, you've got a lot of data, search around for something that might tell you an answer. Well, that's, I'm a firm believer in spend all your time thinking about the questions and then work out what data you might need to help.
Yeah, follow Einstein's advice on that one.
Exactly.
So, okay, so that's kind of the advice to get started. And then you said that you're also have done some research into the kind of skills that you need. Would you mind just expanding on that a little bit about what you're trying to understand there? So is it skills that you need if you are an IoT business, or skills that you need if you're implementing IoT?
Yes, well, I mean, what's sort of unusual about us, let me give you the context for this, is that while it was supplier-led creation, the IoT isn't about, it's about the demand and the need and the use of it. And so the answer is a bit more complicated. So we're mostly focusing the answer on the demand side. So the people who are trying to implement a better supply chain, or the people who are trying to improve the manufacturing process, they're the ones who have to ask the question. Now, so what are the skills I need? And often those skills are around, obviously asking the right questions, and indeed you need enough to know how data might help. If you've got the skills to understand how knowing more might help me, more about my competitor or something else, then you're already, that business analysis side of it, that's the starting point. Then you probably need to have the skill that says, should I do it myself, or could I do it with somebody else? That's the other big one. You don't need all the skills.
Yeah,
And in this,
yeah.
and the buy, yeah, the build or buy, and that's a biggie. And what's sort of happening is that the tools that are allowing you to buy and not build are just growing at an exceptional rate, and the cost of doing them is dropping, and the complexity of them is dropping. So that buy decision is becoming more valid, but of course with the downside of there are so many options. How do I choose? So you have to be way smarter at sorting and understanding the problem and looking at where it worked before, and then deciding whether you need the skills. And of course, there are some fundamental ones that I think those demand-side people will need to have, and they're not necessarily about the technology. They're about how do I share my data in a safe way, or how am I secure and resilient across my whole thing? And then of course there's the other part, which is the IoT skills, which are the idea of systemically thinking about the digital technology that enables that flow of data, right? Now, there's a dearth of those, right? You know, there's people who know about networks, who know about cloud, who know about, and then you've got it's the systemic thinkers of how that end-to-end flow is where we lack. And so that's, for me, that's a killer. Now, you'd think the integrators might step in there, but they're not there yet. Now, that either means that the market isn't mature, or they don't have people who are good enough to do it, or they don't think there is a market. I don't know, I haven't worked that one out yet. Eventually there's a need, I know that.
Yeah, and those that crack that final nut, and like, don't get me wrong, they're then standing on the shoulders of giants to have reached that point. But that's when the floodgates may open.
No, indeed.
Okay,
and
good.
I think every now and again you get some people who just take a big risk, you know, like all of a sudden an Airbnb works out, actually the whole market is vacant beds. What genius, you know, like, or Uber, unused cars.
Yeah.
Brilliant, you know, like that's an amazing concept. Now I just need the technology to find out where they are. And bingo, you know, that's now they build it all themselves, a lot of it, but yeah.
It's true. That's when thinking really changes, though.
Yeah, and indeed for me, that's the other two aspects of this, in a way of thinking of, I sort of regard IoT in that there's the transformative, which is the business model changing, the Uber model thing, the deal working across boundaries of, you know, energy and water, or getting consumers to drive, you know, marketing or something, as opposed to what I sort of call business as usual, but business process re-engineering using IoT, right? But that's sort of like, it's sort of like it's the operational end of IoT, asset management, which is sort of not, it's meat potato stuff. And by the way, you should be doing it anyway. And why aren't you doing it, you idiot? The other stuff's harder, you know, but that's what you have to fear, because that's where people are going to blindside you.
Yeah, and it's all of these different moving parts, and you need excellence in all of them in order for it to really work.
Yeah, and it's so for me, it's that's the big picture thing that you need to grab your head around, because otherwise your chances of making a mistake are pretty big. Now, I don't know, maybe that's the thousand monkey theory, is where you get a lot of people just trying it anyway without knowing what they're doing. But if you just go bang. Yeah. and I'm not to say that sort of works in a way. It's sort of weird, but you wouldn't want to bet on it.
Okay, well, this leads me into my last question, then, which is about what success means. Okay, yep. So for me, this is I'm asking you to answer this as kind of Frank, the person, and then you're also CEO of this organization that's trying to do something big, and then there's IoT as itself. So okay, you know, answering all three of those is maybe too much, but try and think of it as from the different perspectives. So if I ask you what does success mean to you, how do you answer that?
Okay, I have a few answers for this one. I have 2 grandchildren, 2.5 and just under 1. So for me, success is socially good, data-driven world, where we understand the implications of what we do for the planet, for people, and that empowers people working together, and that would be brilliant. Of course, that's not the model that the world works on. The theory is that data makes people make better decisions. Unfortunately, over my lifespan, I've determined that that isn't necessarily what actually happens. People make decisions notwithstanding the data. In fact, they spend a lot of time suppressing the data. And maybe this is a bit like the start of the internet. When the internet first happened, all of a sudden things got spread more. We ended up saying, "Oh, fantastic! We can overthrow despotic dictatorships and stuff." And everyone thought that what was happening in Libya and everywhere else is a great thing. And yeah, I mean, depending on your point of view, it's a great thing. Internet of Things could do the same thing, but of course the danger is that we just find people controlling the data and then suppressing it and everything else. So in the end, what I want for the good is actually not about the IoT. It's about how we govern and how we manage ourselves. And in some ways, what worries me is that IoT creates a bigger hammer to make a mistake or to make good. So that's getting pretty heavy, isn't it? Now, it's a bit like fire. Fire is good. No, it's not. But if I look from IoT Alliance point of view, for me, it's this is about Australia. So this is how do we make Australia more competitive and a socially better place to live, and that's my rubric. And that also goes around the sovereignty of the sort of place we want to be. We don't want to be managed and controlled by something that's not within our domain to vote for and manage. So understanding where the data is and how decisions are made, and decisions aren't necessarily made outside our domain, is important. And I think that those sort of so globalization in one way is not a good thing, because it means everyone's the same and we just get rid of diversity, and I think diversity is brilliant. I think that's what we should have. That's what makes things more interesting. It makes life worth living, really. So yeah, I don't know. Having more control of our own destiny and not be is part of what I think every national entity should look after, I think. But frankly, every tribe should look after, or should be able to be looked after. So there are tribes within nations, right? And so working out how we do that is also part of the solution, I reckon, and which is, and I'm not smart enough and not connected enough to know how that would actually work. But I have a feeling that if we have a way in which we can transparently and trustworthily share data, that's an important building block for that to happen.
Yeah, that's a really nice point to finish on, because I think, yeah, transparency over data can be so empowering for all the layers of society, from the smallest community through to national scale, through to, and also global scale. For the first time, you can actually make new decisions at a global scale. So yeah, it gives you the tools. How we use the tools, that's then up to us.
That is the big, that's the big one. But for me, I think, and that transparency for data actually just goes to an adjacent thing, which is actually really important. And this is where governments are important, is about accountability. So right now, the pure internet model, the internet geek model is, we just get everyone to make their own decisions. They click on, they don't click on, da da da. But of course, we've discovered that over time, people aren't capable of making that decision because they're not given choices that they understand, or they get a black and white. You want the service, you tick, or you don't want the service, you don't tick. And I think that there needs to be a slight rebalancing in terms of the accountability of someone giving you a service and giving you the data for that service to work. That they not only attest, but they're part of what their commitment is, that they provide you a safe service to do this and only this. For me, that's important, because then when you tick, then you can tick against something you trust, not tick against an impenetrable, 50-page document that basically says we're not responsible for anything, right? So that's that rebalancing. Now, and herein lies the problem for government, in that government is accountable in one way or another, especially in democratic places, to do things in certain ways, and there are laws. But if you don't have that same accountability, like a Google, to manage how you route where the top 10 things that you're searching for go, depending on ads, as opposed to whether they're important or valuable or useful or researched or not, and that's not transparent, then you're finding out that accountability is no longer there. So we need to know what we're signing for, what we really have. And I think that's a responsibility of IoT Alliance, but governments, to actually expose that, so that people provide you the service they're giving you, and dare I say it, actually live up to the values that sort of, that they take off, greeting cards or something that they don't believe in. So that's another big.
Such an important point. So thank you so much for making it. And it's one of those that's such a big barrier, but if we can do something with it, or it's a huge responsibility, and it's a difficult mountain to eat, so to speak. But if we can tackle that as an industry and find ways so that we can get round that mountain or over that mountain,
it's really important.
Right now, the ones that makes everything move faster.
Absolutely, we've just had we've got a pretty good Australian Consumer Competition Commissioner in Rod Sims, and he's just done this big digital platforms review, and it revealed what wasn't surprising, in that Facebook and Google utterly dominate digital platforms. They utterly dominate where people search for things. They utterly dominate where the advertising goes, and they utterly dominate where the news is searched for.
Yeah.
And yet, and this is particularly the case of Facebook, they claim that they have no responsibility for any of it, and anything can happen. Now, for me, that is a highly disingenuous situation to be in, because they're actually playing in a vertical market and getting revenue from that vertical market through advertising to support that market. They're saying, and so they are a news channel. They are a services channel, and yet consumer protection doesn't apply to them, and yet factual information doesn't apply to them. So there's a problem.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, sorry about that rant.
We're going to stop there, because I have a feeling we could just keep going. I'm going to say thank you very much. Such interesting insights, and some really nice new perspectives came out there. So thank you very much, Frank.
Oh, good. Thank you, Christine. Sorry for browbeating you for so long.